I stood at the doorway, gripping my phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The screen still displayed the text message that shattered everything. Saw her at the Redstone Motel. Not alone. It came from my friend, Eric. He had no reason to lie, no reason to make something like this up. But even without his message, the signs had been there for months. The late nights. The sudden need for privacy. The excuses that never quite made sense. And yet, I had ignored them. I had convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, that she wouldn't do it again. I was wrong. The moment I stepped into our house, I knew she was back. I could hear her moving around in the bedroom, probably getting ready for bed like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just driven 3 hours out of town to be with another man. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps steady, controlled. When I reached the bedroom door, I pushed it open without knocking. She was standing in front of the mirror, unfastening her necklace. At the sight of me, she froze. "Hey. You home early," she said, her voice a little too casual. I didn't answer. I just watched her, letting the silence stretch between us. She fidgeted, adjusting her hair. "Is everything okay?" I took a step closer, raising my phone so she could see the screen. The message. Her face went pale. I don't know what that's about," she stammered. Lies. Even now, when caught, she clung to them. "Redstone Motel," I said flatly. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Listen, just let me explain." I took a step back before she could touch me. "Explain what?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but each word hit like a hammer. "That you just happened to be in a motel with someone else? That it was all just a misunderstanding?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking, No," I cut her off. "You were thinking. You planned it. You lied. And you thought you'd get away with it." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Please, I love you. I swear, it meant nothing." I exhaled slowly. "It meant enough for you to drive 3 hours for it." She sobbed, pressing her hands against her face. "Please, don't do this. We can fix this." "We can?" "No. We can't." I turned toward the closet and grabbed a suitcase. I tossed it onto the bed and unzipped it. "Pack your things. Leave." She stared at me, her face crumbling. "You throwing everything away? Just like that?" I let out a dry laugh. "You threw it away. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She begged. She pleaded. She swore it would never happen again. I didn't listen. Because I had already listened the first time. I walked out of the room and didn't look back. She left that night. And 3 days later, she was dead. They found her in her parents' house. The police officer who called me didn't give details, just the facts. She had been alone. No foul play suspected. The family was grieving. I sat on the couch, staring at the floor, the phone still pressed against my ear long after the call had ended. The weight of it all pressed down on me, but not in the way people might expect. There was no crushing guilt. No overwhelming grief. Just a strange, hollow stillness. She had cheated. Lied. Looked me in the eyes and begged for another chance, even while she was still tangled up in her own deceptions. And now, with a single irreversible act, she had turned herself into the victim. The last conversation we had played in my mind like a broken record. The pleading. The tears. The desperate promises. And my own words, firm and final, pack your things. Leave. Had I pushed her into this? Had my refusal to forgive sealed her fate? No. I shook my head, trying to force the thought away. This wasn't on me. She had made her choices. But I knew that wouldn't matter to her family. The blame was coming. And I was right. The first message came just an hour later. Her sister. I hope you're happy. You destroyed her. Then another. She loved you more than anything, and you threw her away like she was nothing. And another. You should have forgiven her. You should have helped her. But no, you had to be heartless. More messages followed, each one sharper than the last. Her friends, her cousins, even people I barely knew. All of them needed someone to blame. I didn't respond. What would I even say? That she had slept with another man? That she had done it twice? That I had already forgiven her once, and she had thrown that chance away? It wouldn't matter. None of it would. Because the dead can't defend themselves. The living, however, make the perfect targets. I didn't go to the funeral. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew my presence would turn it into a spectacle. I could already picture the whispers, the glares, the accusations. Instead, I stayed home, ignoring the ringing phone, the endless messages, the weight of all their grief misdirected at me. I told myself it would pass. That in time, people would move on. But then my own mother called. You need to go, she said. Her voice was tense, clipped. No, I don't. People will talk. They already are. She sighed. They're saying awful things about you. You need to show them that you're not some heartless monster. Mom, She loved you, she snapped. And now she's dead. And you. She cut herself off, but I already knew what she was about to say. And you let it happen. The words weren't spoken, but they hung in the silence between us. I closed my eyes. I'm not going. Fine, she said coldly. Do whatever you want. Then she hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, wondering when my own mother had decided I was the villain in this story. 2 days later, I returned to work, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could start moving forward. But the moment I stepped into the office, I knew I had been wrong. The stares. The hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked by. Even the people who didn't know her personally had heard the story. And the version they had been told was not the truth. I made it to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop, pretending I didn't feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching me. Eric was the only one who dared to approach. He pulled up a chair next to me and let out a heavy sigh. They're talking, he muttered. I figured. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, man. You did nothing wrong. You know that, right? I nodded, but it didn't feel like enough. People need someone to blame, he continued. And you're the easiest target. It's not fair, but that's how it is. I know. If you want, I can set the record straight. Let people know the real story. I exhaled slowly. Would it change anything? Eric hesitated, then shook his head. Probably not. Exactly. Because the truth didn't matter. People had already made up their minds. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed again. Another message. I considered ignoring it, but something made me glance at the screen. It wasn't from her family. It wasn't from a friend. It was an unknown number. And the message was short. I know what she did. And I know she wasn't alone that night. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. For the first time since it all began, I felt something close to fear. Whoever sent this knew something. Something I didn't. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure this story was over. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing. I know what she did. And I know she wasn't alone that night. Who the hell sent this? And what did they mean? My fingers hovered over the screen, itching to respond. But I hesitated. Whoever this was, they had chosen to remain anonymous. That meant they either didn't want to be found or were afraid of something. Or someone. Instead of replying, I saved the number and put my phone down. If this was some kind of sick joke, I wasn't going to entertain it. But if it wasn't? If there was really more to the story? I needed to find out. The next morning, I woke up to 3 more messages. Unknown number, I don't know if I should be telling you this. Unknown number, but you deserve to know. Unknown number, meet me at the old diner on 5th, tonight. 9 p.m. My pulse quickened as I read the last one. This was real. Someone out there knew something. But did I really want to hear it? I had spent days drowning in the weight of everyone's accusations, trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing. That her death wasn't my fault. What if this changed everything? What if I found out that I was responsible, somehow? I shook my head. No. That wasn't possible. I had walked away. She had made her own choices. And now, it seemed, someone wanted to make sure I knew all of them. The day dragged on, every second stretching endlessly as I waited for night to fall. By the time 9 p.m. rolled around, I was already parked outside the old diner. It was a small, run-down place, the kind of spot where you could eat a burger at 3 a.m. and nobody would ask questions. Inside, it was nearly empty. A lone waitress wiped down the counter. A couple sat in the far corner, talking in hushed voices. And near the window, in a booth, sat a man in a grey hoodie, looking down at his phone. I knew immediately, it was him. I took a breath and walked over. As soon as I sat down, he slid a manila envelope across the table toward me. Look inside, he said quietly. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photos. Photos of her. My ex. But not just any photos. Photos from the night she died. My stomach twisted as I flipped through them. The first showed her sitting in a bar, a drink in her hand. The next, leaving the bar with someone. And then? The last one made my breath catch. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, his arm around her waist, leading her toward a car. Not just any car. His car. A car I recognized. Because I had seen it before. Parked outside my apartment. The same night I had caught her cheating. I looked up at the man in the hoodie, my hands gripping the photos tightly. Who took these? I demanded. He exhaled, leaning back against the booth. I did. Why? Because I was following him. My heart pounded. Following who? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigarette, rolling it between his fingers without lighting it. That guy? The one in the photos, he finally said. He's not who you think he is. I frowned. What the hell are you talking about? The man sighed. Your ex, she wasn't just cheating on you, man. She was involved in something. Something dangerous. I shook my head. No. That's not possible. She was meeting with him regularly, he interrupted. And not just him. Others, too. I don't know exactly what she was into, but I know this. He leaned in, lowering his voice. The night she died? She wasn't supposed to be alone. A chill ran through me. Then why was she? He looked away. because something went wrong. I sat back, trying to process everything. This wasn't just about an affair. It wasn't just about a breakup. There was something bigger at play here. And I was now caught in the middle of it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. The man put out his cigarette, then stood up. "Because," he said, pulling his hood up, "you were never supposed to take the blame for this." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with the photos. And the growing, suffocating feeling that I had just stepped into something I didn't understand. Something that might get me killed. I sat in the diner long after the man in the hoodie left. The envelope was still in my hands, the photos inside burning into my thoughts like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. She had been with him. That night. The same man I had seen her with before. I clenched my jaw, flipping through the images again, studying every detail. The bar's neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The way she leaned into him, just like she had when she begged me for a second chance. And the last photo? The one where he led her toward his car. That car. I knew I had seen it before, not just outside my apartment, but somewhere else. Somewhere important. I just couldn't place it. Not yet. When I finally left the diner, my head was spinning. The air outside was cold, biting against my skin as I stepped into the parking lot. My car was parked under a flickering streetlight, and for a moment, I just stood there, trying to piece everything together. Who was that man? And why had she been with him the night she died? I pulled out my phone, staring at the unknown number that had sent me the messages. I needed answers. Before I could change my mind, I typed out a reply. "Me, who are you?" No response. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. Maybe they weren't expecting me to actually show up. Maybe they had already done their part, and now they were gone. Or maybe they were waiting. I got in my car and started the engine, but I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not when there were still too many unanswered questions. Instead, I found myself driving toward a place I hadn't been in weeks. Her apartment. It was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people kept to themselves. I pulled up to the curb and killed the engine, my hands tightening around the wheel. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same porch light flickered above the door. The same set of blinds were drawn over the windows. But she wasn't there anymore. And yet, as I sat there, staring at that familiar door, I felt it. Something was off. Someone was inside. I didn't know how long I waited, but eventually, the door opened. And he stepped out. The man from the photos. I froze, gripping the steering wheel as I watched him lock the door behind him. He didn't look around. Didn't hesitate. Just walked straight to his car, the same damn car from the photos. My pulse pounded as I watched him get in and pull away from the curb. I didn't think. I just acted. I started my engine and followed. He drove for a while, weaving through the city streets like he had nowhere to be. But I wasn't stupid. He was checking to see if anyone was tailing him. I kept my distance, watching as he finally pulled into a parking lot behind a rundown strip mall. The kind of place where businesses go to die. I parked a few spaces away and waited, watching as he stepped out and headed toward the back entrance of a dimly lit bar. What the hell was he doing here? I needed to know. Before I could talk myself out of it, I got out of my car and followed. The bar was nearly empty. A few men sat at the counter, nursing drinks. A couple played pool in the corner. And at a booth near the back, he was there. Sitting across from someone. A man in a dark suit. They were talking in hushed voices, their expressions serious. I took a seat at the bar, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my focus was on them. I couldn't hear much over the hum of conversation and music, but I caught a few words. Not yet. Too much attention. He doesn't know. And then? The fiancé? I stiffened. The man in the suit leaned in, his voice just barely audible. We should have handled him, too. My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my breathing steady as I slid off my bar stool and headed toward the exit. My hands itched to reach for my phone, to text the unknown number and demand answers. But I didn't get the chance. Because the moment I stepped outside, I wasn't alone. A shadow moved near my car. Someone was waiting. Watching. I turned slowly, my heart hammering as a figure stepped into the dim glow of the streetlight. It was the man in the hoodie. The same one who had given me the photos. He shoved his hands into his pockets, his expression unreadable. I told you, he said quietly. You weren't supposed to take the blame for this. I swallowed hard. Then tell me what the hell is going on. He glanced toward the bar, his jaw tightening. You need to leave. No. Not until you tell me. They know who you are, he cut in. And they're not gonna let you walk away from this. A chill crawled up my spine. Then what do I do? For the first time, his expression softened. You disappear. And then, before I could say another word, he was gone. Leaving me alone. And hunted. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Everything I thought I knew about her death was crumbling, replaced by something darker, something dangerous. She had been with that man, the same man who had just been discussing whether or not I should be handled. And now? Now I was supposed to disappear? No. That wasn't happening. I wasn't going to run. I was going to find out the truth. And if they thought they could silence me? They had another thing coming. By morning, I had a plan. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for them to come after me. I needed to get ahead of this, and that meant I had to start where it all began, with her. More specifically, with the night she died. The police report had been brief. No signs of foul play. They had ruled it as suicide almost immediately. But if she had been with that man? What if it wasn't? What if I had been played? I drove to the one place I had avoided since it happened, the motel where they found her body. It was on the outskirts of town, a rundown place with faded neon lights and a cracked parking lot. The kind of place where people checked in when they didn't want to be found. The sight of it made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to pull into the lot and step out. There was an old man at the front desk, his eyes glazed over from too many years of boredom. He barely looked up when I walked in. Help you? I slid $100 bill across the counter. I need some information, I said. He raised an eyebrow, then pocketed the money. What kind of information? I took a deep breath. A woman was found dead here a few weeks ago. Room 214. I need to know if she was alone. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. You a cop? Do I look like a cop? He shrugged. You look like a guy who doesn't want to hear the truth. I felt my jaw tighten. Try me. The old man sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before glancing toward the back office. When he looked at me again, something in his gaze had shifted. She wasn't alone, he muttered. My blood ran cold. Who was with her? He hesitated, then pulled out a tattered guest book. He flipped through the pages until he landed on the right date. I leaned in, my pulse hammering as he pointed to the name written under room 214. It wasn't hers. And it sure as hell wasn't mine. It was his. The man from the photos. The same man I had seen last night. He paid cash, the old man said. Didn't want a receipt. But he was here. I swallowed hard. Did you see them leave? No, he said. I didn't see her at all after check-in. But I saw him. When? About an hour before they found her. I stiffened. He left? Yeah. He frowned. And he didn't look happy. I left the motel with my mind spinning. She wasn't alone. He had been there. And he had left before she was found. So why the hell did the police never mention it? Because they didn't know. Or worse. Because someone made sure they didn't find out. I drove straight to the police station. If there was one person I knew I could trust, it was Detective Harris. He was the one who handled her case. He had always been straight with me, even when I didn't want to hear it. But when I walked in, the look on his face told me something was wrong. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I frowned. I need to talk to you. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Jesus, kid. What did you do? What do you mean? He glanced around, then pulled me into his office, shutting the door behind us. I got a call this morning, he said. From Internal Affairs. My stomach dropped. Why? Because someone filed a complaint against me. Said I messed up your fiancé's case. I stared at him. What? That's bullshit. I know. His jaw tightened. But that's not the point. The point is, someone wants me off this case. I sat down heavily. They're covering something up. He nodded. And whatever it is, they don't want you digging into it. I exhaled slowly. Then we have a problem. He looked at me sharply. Why? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo, the one of her and the man outside the bar. I slid it across the desk. Because I know who she was with that night. Harris stared at the photo for a long time. Then he swore under his breath. You recognize him? I asked. He nodded grimly. Yeah, he said. And if he's involved, you're in way more danger than I thought. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. Where did you get this? A friend, I said, not ready to give names yet. He stuttered me, then exhaled sharply. You should have never come here. Why? Because someone doesn't want me asking questions? He didn't answer. That was enough of an answer. You said you know who he is, I pressed. Who is he? Harris hesitated. Then, finally, he said, his name is Daniel Carter. The name meant nothing to me. Who is he? Harris sighed. Ex-cop. Used to be on the force years ago. Now he works in private security. Security for who? He hesitated. For people you don't want to piss off. I sat in my car outside the station, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Daniel Carter. Her lover. A cop. Or at least, he used to be. What the hell was she doing with someone like him? And why did he walk away from that motel room while she never left? Too many questions. Not enough answers. But I knew one thing, I needed to find Daniel Carter. I spent the next few hours digging. Carter had left the force under controversial circumstances, which was a nice way of saying he got caught doing something he shouldn't have. But instead of getting charged, he got a new job. Private security. For very powerful people. People with money. People who made problems disappear. And now, he was a problem I couldn't ignore. I finally tracked him to a bar on the west side of town. The kind of place where people didn't ask questions and didn't like outsiders. I wasn't exactly in the mood to make friends. I walked in, scanning the room. Low lighting, the stink of whiskey and cigarettes. A few rough-looking guys hunched over their drinks, murmuring in low voices. And then, at the back, him. Daniel Carter. He was sitting alone, a half-empty glass in front of him. He looked rougher than in the pictures, thicker around the middle, a little older, but his eyes were sharp. Cold. A man who had seen too much. Done too much. I walked straight to his table. He glanced up. Didn't look surprised to see me. "You got some nerve," he muttered. I sat down. "We need to talk." He took a slow sip of his drink, then smirked. "No, kid. You need to leave. Not until I get answers." He sighed, setting his glass down. "You don't want answers. You want a story that makes sense to you. But the truth? You're not gonna like it. Try me." His eyes flickered with something, amusement? "All right," he said, leaning in. "Here's the truth, your fiancée wasn't who you thought she was." I stiffened. "She was playing you," he continued. "Just like she played me. Just like she played a dozen other guys before us." "No. That was bullshit." "You lying," I snapped. "Am I?" He tilted his head. "You think she was some innocent girl who just made a mistake? She was in deep, kid. Way deeper than you ever knew." "In deep with what?" "People." He shrugged. "People with money. Power. People who paid her for services." I felt something inside me crack. "You saying she was?" "Call it whatever you want," he said. "But she wasn't just your fiancée. And she sure as hell wasn't just mine." I wanted to hit him. But deep down, I was afraid he was telling the truth. "She was meeting someone that night," he said. "Not me. Someone else. Someone who wanted her dead." "Then why were you there?" "Because she called me." His face darkened. "She was scared. Said she needed help. But by the time I got there," he shook his head. "It was already too late." My hands clenched into fists. "You left." "Yeah." He exhaled. "Because I knew what would happen if I stuck around." "You think the cops care about the truth?" "They care about keeping their jobs." "And the people she was mixed up with?" "They wanted this buried. Fast." I swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" He gave me a long, measured look. "Now?" He smirked. "Now you forget all of this ever happened. You really think I'm just going to walk away?" His expression turned cold. "You will if you want to stay alive." Daniel Carter leaned back, watching me with something between amusement and pity. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, swelling his drink. "Then explain it to me," I snapped. He sighed. "I already told you, kid. She was playing a dangerous game. And she lost." "Who was she meeting that night?" I asked. His smirk faded. "I don't know." I clenched my fists. "Bullshit. You were there. You know." He exhaled sharply. "Look, I have a rule about staying alive. And part of that rule is knowing when to keep my mouth shut." I grabbed his glass and slammed it onto the table, spilling whiskey everywhere. "You gonna tell me, Carter? One way or another." For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. "You got some fight in you, I'll give you that," he said, shaking his head. "Fine. I'll give you something. But if you're smart, you'll stop here." I waited. The guy she was meeting? He wasn't just some random client. He leaned forward. He was someone powerful. Someone untouchable. Who? He hesitated. Then. His name is Richard Langley. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in this city did. Richard Langley was a billionaire. A real estate tycoon. A man whose name never appeared in scandals, because scandals disappeared before they started. My hands tightened into fists. You telling me my fiancée was involved with Richard Langley? I'm telling you, Carter said, she was in way over her head. And now, so are you. I left the bar, my mind racing. Richard Langley. That name alone could make people disappear. And now I had it. Now I knew who she was meeting that night. And why she never left. I needed proof. I needed something that tied Langley to what happened. Because if I was right, he killed her. And I was going to prove it. I spent the next few days digging. Langley was clean. Too clean. No scandals. No controversies. Nothing but carefully crafted business deals and charity events. But the deeper I went, the more cracks I found. Whispers. Rumors. Disappearances. People who crossed Langley had a habit of going missing. People who got too close to his secrets never lasted long. And now, I was right in the middle of it. Then, I got a call. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. You don't know when to quit, do you? A cold voice. Familiar. Daniel Carter. What do you want? I asked. To keep you alive. I almost laughed. That a threat? A warning, he said. You think you're the first guy to come after Langley? You not. And you won't be the last. But if you don't stop now, you won't be anything at all. He killed her, I said. Silence. Then. You can't prove it. Watch me. Carter sighed. You really want to die over this? I want the truth. Another silence. Then, finally. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. Pier 17. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. Langley was a name you didn't say out loud unless you were ready to bury yourself. But I was past that point. I had to know. I had to finish this. Pier 17 was nearly empty when I got there. Carter was waiting, hands in his pockets. You came, he said. I need answers. He exhaled. Fine, he said. But after this? You on your own. I nodded. Your fiancée, he started, wasn't just having an affair. She was blackmailing Langley. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Blackmailing him? She had something on him. Something big. And she thought she could use it. He shook his head. She was wrong. I swallowed. What did she have? Carter hesitated. Then he said something that changed everything. She had proof that he killed someone. I stared at Carter, barely processing his words. She had proof? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. He nodded. Yeah. And that's why she's dead. A cold wind blew in from the bay, but I barely felt it. My fiancée wasn't just cheating on me. She wasn't just tangled up with Langley. She had something on him. Something that got her killed. What was it? I pressed. Carter hesitated, rubbing his jaw like he was debating whether to keep talking. A video, he finally said. I clenched my fists. A video of what? Carter exhaled. A murder. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You telling me, I said carefully, that my fiancé had video proof of Richard Langley killing someone? Carter gave a single nod. Then where the hell is it? He shook his head. Gone. Wiped clean. That's what Langley does. He erases things. People. You telling me she died for nothing? I growled. No, Carter said. I'm telling you she died because she didn't understand who she was up against. I stared at him. And you do? He sighed. I know enough to keep my head down. I turned away, staring at the water. You said she was blackmailing him. How? Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then, she sent him a message. Told him she had the video. Told him to meet her that night. I swallowed. And now she's dead. I forced my breathing to stay even. Who was the victim? Carter shook his head. I don't know. But if Langley killed him, it was someone important. I exhaled sharply. So she had proof. And now it's gone. Just like her. That's what happens when you play with fire, Carter muttered. I turned back to him. How do you know all this? His jaw tightened. Because I was there. Silence stretched between us. You were there? I repeated. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally. Yeah. I stepped closer. So tell me exactly what happened. He hesitated, then nodded. She called Langley. Said she wanted to meet. I was working security that night. We followed him to the hotel. She was waiting in a private suite. When we got there, she looked nervous. But she held her ground. She told him she had the video. That if he didn't pay, she'd go public. He exhaled. Langley didn't say a word. Just stared at her. Then he smiled. Told her he admired her courage. I swallowed hard. And then? Carter's face darkened. Then she was dead. My pulse pounded in my ears. You telling me you stood there and watched him kill her? Carter's jaw clenched. I didn't know he was going to do it. None of us did. How did he do it? Poison. I froze. Poison? He nodded. He poured her a drink. Told her it was just business. She took a sip, and 30 seconds later, she was on the floor. I felt sick. And you just let it happen? Carter looked away. You think I had a choice? You don't say no to Langley. I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. Where's her body? Gone. Gone where? Someplace you'll never find it. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to hurt him. But I needed him. Tell me everything you know about that video, I said. Carter hesitated. It was on a flash drive, he said. She had it with her that night. After she died, Langley took it. Destroyed it. I swallowed hard. And you sure it's gone? Carter nodded. Then why am I still alive? His face darkened. Because you're not a threat. Yet. That night, I sat in my apartment, replaying everything in my mind. Langley had my fiancée killed. And he erased every trace of her. But something didn't add up. If the video was destroyed, why did she think she still had leverage? She wasn't stupid. She wouldn't have met Langley unless she was sure she had proof. Which meant there had to be another copy. And I was going to find it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the wall, replaying everything Carter had told me. My fiancée had been murdered because she had proof, real proof, that Langley had killed someone. But if she thought she had leverage, then she must have believed the evidence still existed. That meant there was another copy somewhere. The question was, where? I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our old texts. 6 years together, thousands of messages, and now, looking back, every conversation felt like a clue I had missed. Then, I found it. A message from a few weeks before she died. If anything ever happens to me, check the safe. I sat up straight. The safe. I knew exactly where it was. It was past midnight, but I didn't care. I grabbed my car keys and drove to her apartment. The place had been emptied out after her death, her family had taken most of her things, and her landlord had already listed the unit for rent. But I knew something they didn't. The safe wasn't in plain sight. I parked down the street and walked toward the building. The security system was still active, but I had her code. I punched it in. The door clicked open. I was inside. The apartment was cold and lifeless. Most of the furniture was gone, and the walls were bare. But I wasn't here for memories. I was here for proof. I moved to the bedroom and dropped to my knees. The floor was hardwood, but there was one loose panel near the closet. I pried it up with my fingers and found the metal safe beneath. I exhaled. It was still here. I entered the code she had once given me, her birthday, backward. The lock clicked. I pulled the door open and reached inside. My fingers brushed against a small, black flash drive. I had it. The proof she had died for. I didn't check the footage there. I wasn't about to risk getting caught inside an apartment I had no right to be in. I tucked the flash drive into my pocket and left, locking everything behind me. I drove straight home, locked my door, and sat at my desk. My laptop was already open. I plugged in the drive and held my breath as the file loaded. A single video. I clicked it. The screen flickered to life. It was security footage. A hotel room. The camera was hidden, probably installed inside a lamp or smoke detector. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. A man sat on a chair, tied up, his face bruised and swollen. Blood stained his white dress shirt. He was alive, but barely. Then, the door opened. Richard Langley walked in. Langley was calm. He wasn't wearing a mask or gloves. He wasn't worried about hiding his identity. He knelt in front of the man and spoke, though there was no audio. The man shook his head, clearly pleading. Langley smiled. Then he pulled out a knife. My stomach twisted. Langley grabbed the man's hair, tilted his head back, and slit his throat. Blood gushed from the wound. The man thrashed for a few seconds, then went still. Langley didn't react. He stood up, wiped his knife on the man's shirt, and walked out of the room like nothing had happened. The video ended. I leaned back, gripping the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. This was it. This was the proof. And now, I had it. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This was my chance. My fiancée had died trying to use this footage, but I wasn't going to make her mistake. She had threatened Langley. That was the wrong move. You don't want a man like that. You don't ask for something in return. You bury him with it. I needed a plan. I copied the video to 3 different external drives and hid them in separate locations. If Langley somehow found me, he wouldn't get them all. Then, I wrote an email. To the FBI Cyber Crimes Division. Subject: urgent, video evidence of murder. I attached the file. Then, I hit send. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't trust the FBI to act fast enough. Langley had connections, he could bury this before it ever saw the light of day. I needed public exposure. I uploaded the video to a secure cloud service with a timed release. If anything happened to me, it would go live automatically. Then, I contacted a journalist. Someone big. Someone who couldn't be silenced. I found a well-known investigative reporter, one who had exposed corruption before, and sent him the footage. His reply came 10 minutes later. "Who are you? Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. Instead, I sent one more message. "This goes live in 24 hours. Make sure the world sees it." Then, I shut my laptop. It was done. Langley was finished. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening. Every small sound made me flinch. The wind against the window. The distant hum of traffic. The creak of the old pipes in the walls. My hand hovered near the drawer where I kept my gun. Just in case. Langley had to know by now. The video was out there. The FBI had it. A journalist had it. A dozen copies were hidden in places he couldn't reach. His empire was crumbling. And men like him don't go down quietly. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it, my pulse quickening. A new message from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake." I exhaled through my nose, steadying my breathing. My hands weren't shaking, but they wanted to. Another message. "Meet me. Let's talk." I didn't answer. I turned off the phone and took out the battery. If Langley wanted to talk, it wasn't going to be on his terms. I packed a bag. Cash. A burner phone. A change of clothes. I wasn't running. I was preparing. Langley was dangerous, but now, so was I. He had power. Money. Connections. But I had something better. I had nothing to lose. I left my apartment through the back entrance. I didn't take my car. Too easy to track. Instead, I walked. 10 blocks. Then, I hailed a cab. I gave the driver an address across town, a cheap motel, cash only. I wasn't going home tonight. Home wasn't safe. Not anymore. At the motel, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and turned on the news. It was already spreading. Billionaire Richard Langley under federal investigation. Anonymous source leaks shocking murder footage. Wall Street mogul linked to grisly execution. Langley's face was everywhere. I watched as reporters dissected the footage, playing the video in blurred-out loops. Experts speculated. Legal analysts debated. FBI officials refused to comment. Langley was cornered. And that made him desperate. I turned off the TV and sat in silence. Then, I waited. Waited for the first move. Waited for him. At 3 a.m., there was a knock at my door. I reached for my gun, heart hammering. I didn't speak. I didn't move. The knock came again. A pause. Then. "It's Carter." I let out a breath. I checked the peephole. It was him. Alone. I unlatched the door and let him in. He looked rough. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight with tension. He didn't sit. "What the hell did you do?" he hissed. I didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair. "You have no idea how deep this goes." "I know exactly how deep it goes." He shook his head. "No. You don't. Langley isn't just some rich psychopath. He has people in law enforcement. He has judges in his pocket. You think the FBI is going to save you? Half of them work for him." I frowned. "Then why hasn't he stopped it?" Carter hesitated. because he's losing control. That was the key. Langley had built his empire on control. He paid off the right people, silenced the right threats, buried the right evidence. But I hadn't played by his rules. I hadn't asked for money. I hadn't asked for favors. I had set fire to his kingdom and let it burn. Now, he was scrambling. "He's coming for you," Carter said. "You need to disappear." "No." "Damn it, man, listen to me." "No," I said again. "I'm not running." Carter stared at me, exasperated. "Then what's your plan?" I loaded my gun. "I'm going to finish this." Carter swore under his breath, pacing the small room. "You don't get it. This isn't a movie. You're not a hero. You're a man with a target on your back. Langley will keep coming until you're dead. Then I'll make sure he dies first." Silence. Then, Carter sighed. "I can get you an address." I met his gaze. "Do it." 20 minutes later, I had it. Langley's private estate. The place he ran to when things got bad. A fortress. Guarded. Secure. But not impenetrable. I strapped on my holster. Tucked my knife into my boot. Carter grabbed my arm. "Don't be stupid. I'm done being careful." I left before he could stop me. Tonight, it ended.